The descent through the thick clouds of Gora 9 was silent except for the low hum of the transport's failing engines. The atmosphere outside was an unnatural green, streaked with gray veins of vapor that pulsed like living veins. The human cadet, Eli Morgan, leaned against the reinforced window and watched the fog swirl as the ship trembled. Around him, alien cadets from 10 different worlds adjusted their breathing masks and checked their filters. Some of them joked nervously about the swamp's reputation. Others stared at their devices, tracking toxin levels that rose faster than the ship could compensate. When the transport finally landed with a dull metallic thud, a heavy stillness followed, as though the planet itself had been waiting. Eli stepped out first. The air was warm and damp, pressing against his skin like a living creature. He could taste metal on his tongue and smell something rotten beneath the sweetness of wet plants. The ground squelched under his boots, releasing bubbles that popped with faint hisses. The swamp stretched in every direction, a vast expanse of black water, luminous roots, and twisted trees that seemed to breathe. In the distance, faint lights blinked like eyes, and every shadow moved as if it were alive. He felt his suit vibrate with sensor alerts, the visor flashing warnings about airborne spores and corrosive humidity. He ignored them. The other cadets disembarked hesitantly, their various forms adapting in different ways. A group of reptilian Korathans spread their gills wide, filtering toxins, while the crystalline Thyvan covered themselves in a thin mist shield that shimmered with blue light. The insectoid Vel shrieked softly as their legs sank into the mud, chittering about contamination. Eli moved away from the group and scanned the perimeter, his mind already working through the basics. Find high ground, locate clean water, and secure fire. He knew the swamp would not allow mistakes. Within the first hour, 2 cadets collapsed. The med drones beeped uselessly as their suits' filters melted, eaten away by acidic spores that clung to the air like invisible dust. Eli helped drag the bodies onto drier soil, noticing how quickly the flesh beneath their armor turned pale gray, then green. The toxins didn't just kill, they transformed. He watched the veins under the skin pulse with bioluminescent light before the bodies went still. The smell of death mixed with the thick humidity, making the air even heavier. Some of the others began to panic, shouting over comms, demanding extraction. There was no response. The signal tower had already corroded. By nightfall, the swamp had swallowed the light. The darkness was complete, broken only by the faint glow of spores drifting through the mist like tiny lanterns. Eli built a fire using dried moss and splinters of bark he had tested for reaction. It smoked heavily, but burned slow enough to keep the air clear around him. He sat close to it, his knife in hand, watching the others retreat into their flickering shelters. The alien cadets tried to sleep, but he could hear the coughing, the scratching of skin, and the desperate breathing through cracked masks. He knew what would happen next. Eli had grown up on a death world, an Earth that had long since evolved into something harsher than most species could comprehend. His childhood had been filled with toxins, radiation, and mutated insects the size of dogs. To survive, he had learned to read the world like a living system where everything sought balance through pain. When he joined the Galactic Academy, his instructors often said that humans were built wrong, too adaptive, too reckless, too stubborn to die. Gora 9 would prove them right or bury him among the others. The first screams came before dawn. He found one of the Thavan half submerged in the water, its crystalline body cracked and leaking bright blue fluid. The swamp had eaten through the armor and entered the bloodstream, turning the fluid into a corrosive foam that hissed against the ground. The others refused to approach. Eli dragged the body away alone, ignoring the sizzling of acid that burned through his gloves. He covered the remains with mud, both to hide the smell and to protect himself from whatever spores might rise from decay. He didn't look back. By the second day, the camp was chaos. The alien cadets argued, their different languages blending into a single desperate tone. Some accused others of sabotaging filters. A few ran into the fog, thinking they saw safe ground, only to vanish into the green haze without sound. Eli scavenged through their abandoned gear, stripping wires, filters, and fragments of armor for tools. He knew survival wasn't about luck. It was about learning faster than the world tried to kill you. His body ached, and the air burned his lungs, but he moved methodically. He avoided the colorful vines, memorized which bubbles hissed with acid and which only released gas. He found a patch of ground higher than the rest, a natural island formed by tangled roots, and claimed it as his base. The swamp was not silent. It breathed, groaned, and whispered. The trees released low hums that vibrated through the ground, and beneath the black water, something large moved, slowly, deliberately. Every sound seemed amplified by the fog. At one point, he saw a shape rise, a long, scaled creature with eyes like molten gold watching him from a pool 20 meters away. It didn't attack. It only watched. Then it sank back under the surface, leaving ripples that glowed faintly as the spores reacted to its movement. Eli kept his knife ready, but deep down he understood something. The swamp was aware of him. As the sun, or whatever passed for it on Gora 9, rose again, the last of the cadets fell. Some suffocated inside their suits. Others clawed at their throats as the toxins invaded their nervous systems. Eli tried to help one of them, a small avian female named Race, by filtering air through a moss mesh he had created. She managed to breathe for a few minutes longer, her trembling hand clutching his arm in gratitude before her body went limp. He sat beside her, silent, then closed her eyes. He had seen death before, but not like this, not so total, not so absolute. He buried her under a mound of tangled vines and marked the spot with her insignia plate. The act felt hollow, but necessary. Then he turned back to his fire, fed it with dried roots, and began to think. The swamp wasn't just poison, it was a system. Every death fed something. Every decay released new life. The toxins must come from specific organisms, fungi, bacteria, plants feeding on each other in endless cycles. If he could find what created the poison, he could learn to counter it. If he could survive long enough to understand, he could turn this death world into something livable. That night, as the mist thickened and the stars disappeared behind the shifting sky, Eli heard the sound again, the low, rolling call of the swamp beasts. It didn't sound like a threat anymore. It sounded like breathing, deep and ancient. He realized the swamp wasn't his enemy. It was testing him, as it had tested the others. But unlike them, he was not here to conquer it or flee from it. He was here to understand it. And for the first time since landing, he smiled faintly under the faint glow of the spores. The others were gone. The camp was silent. He was the last heartbeat in the swamp of death, and from now on, every breath he took would belong to this place. The days that followed blurred into one another as Eli's world shrank to the small patch of elevated roots he now called his island. Around him, the swamp whispered in constant motion, bubbles bursting in slow rhythm, leaves trembling with unseen breath, and distant calls echoing like songs of mourning. He had stopped counting time. The sun barely existed here, hidden behind layers of green mist. Survival had narrowed to a rhythm of observation, collection, and testing. His body adjusted to the poison-laced air through exhaustion and will, but he knew that even his resilience had limits. The lightheadedness and burning in his lungs told him the toxins were slowly winning. He needed to understand what he was fighting before it consumed him entirely. Each morning, he ventured farther into the swamp, careful not to disturb the soil too deeply. His movements became deliberate and quiet. The water shimmered faintly underfoot, revealing organisms that shifted color in response to his presence, tiny globes of life that glowed red when he stepped near. He started taking samples using hollow bone tubes scavenged from dead swamp creatures, sealing the ends with resin. When he returned to camp, he crushed pieces of fungus, sap, and glowing moss into different mixtures, heating them in small stone cups balanced above the fire. His methods were primitive, but the results fascinated him. Some mixtures burned with white smoke that cleared his head for a few moments. Others sent him coughing and trembling on the ground. He kept notes scratched into thin slabs of bark, recording every reaction with steady precision. As he worked, the swamp seemed to watch. The beast remained unseen but present. Occasionally, glowing eyes shimmered beyond the fog, reflecting the dim firelight. Once he felt a heavy vibration ripple through the ground as something massive moved beneath the water near his island. He froze, hand on his knife, until the tremor passed. Strangely, he began to sense a pattern in the timing of those disturbances, almost as though the creatures followed his experiments, drawn to the smoke and heat. It was not curiosity in the human sense. It was more like the swamp itself was taking note of what he was becoming. He tested each plant by touch before using it. Some secreted a thin, oily substance that melted through fabric. Others released vapors that numbed his fingers or caused hallucinations. The swamp's poison was not uniform. It shifted in layers, each organism producing its own defense, each reacting to another. The more he studied it, the more it resembled a war between species locked in chemical combat. Every plant, every fungus, every creature was fighting to survive, just as he was. The realization both terrified and inspired him. If life could exist here in such harmony with death, then perhaps survival was not about resistance, but adaptation. On the 6th cycle, he found something unusual near the base of a decaying tree, a cluster of transparent bulbs filled with swirling green fluid. He assumed they were fungal sacs and carefully cut one open. The liquid hissed on contact with air, but did not burn his skin. Instead, it left a cooling sensation. He rubbed a small amount on a fresh wound from a thorn cut, and within minutes, the pain eased. He tested it again on another small scratch. It sealed almost instantly. The swamp's venom could destroy, but this substance hinted that its cure existed within the same ecosystem. His instincts sharpened with hope. That night, while mixing the fluid with dried moss powder, he noticed that adding even a drop of the transparent sap neutralized the acidic smoke from nearby vines. He inhaled cautiously and realized that his breath no longer burned. It was the first real progress he had made since arriving. He worked tirelessly, refining the combination until the mixture held a faint silver hue and an earthy scent that reminded him of rain. When he applied it to his chest and breathed in through a soaked cloth, the dizziness faded. His mind cleared. For the first time, he felt alive instead of merely surviving. With each experiment, he began to understand the swamp's logic. Its toxicity was not random. It was symbiotic. One organism produced venom, another produced its antidote. The ecosystem maintained balance through opposition. That realization changed everything. Instead of fearing each new discovery, he sought the connections between them. He watched how one type of glowing mold only grew on trees that produced a thick orange sap. When he burned that sap, it released fumes that repelled insects but also caused nausea. Yet the mold feeding on it produced a fine dust that eased the nausea entirely. It was a natural cycle of attack and defense. The sound was neither threat nor greeting. It was acknowledgement. He responded by lowering his weapon and mimicking the tone as best as he could. The creature blinked once, then slipped back beneath the surface. The moment was brief, but it changed everything for him. The swamp was aware, and he was becoming part of its awareness. From then on, he worked with a sense of quiet purpose. Each discovery felt guided. He began marking his territory with the resin smoke that the beasts seemed to respect, ensuring that nothing approached his camp during the night. When he moved, the smaller creatures stayed out of his path. He believed it was the scent of his mixtures, but deep down he sensed it was something more, a growing acceptance. The swamp's poisons no longer attacked him with the same intensity. His body had adjusted, his blood carrying traces of the antidotes he created. He started cataloging his findings in a systematic way. He carved symbols into pieces of bark, one for each plant, fungus, or chemical reaction. He tested combinations by touch, burn, and ingestion, recording everything with obsessive focus. His mind drifted between science and instinct, between human logic and the swamp's pulse. He began to dream of patterns, spirals of green and black that mirrored the flow of toxins in his experiments. When he woke, he found that the dreams often led him to new discoveries, as if the swamp was teaching him directly. By the end of the second week, the air around his island had grown clearer. The fire burned steadier, the insects avoided his space, and even the bubbling pools nearby released fewer fumes. The swamp was adapting to his presence, or perhaps he was adapting to it so completely that the boundary between them blurred. His skin bore marks from countless small burns and cuts, but none festered. His antidote worked, imperfectly, but enough to keep him alive. He drank small doses daily, each time refining the mixture, each time feeling the poison's grip loosen. One night, as he sat near the dying fire, he reflected on what he had become. He was no longer the academy cadet who had landed here with the others. The old rules of procedure, safety, and restraint had lost meaning. Here, survival meant surrendering control to the environment while learning its rhythm. He realized that the swamp had never wanted him dead. It had only wanted him to understand. The others had fought it, tried to resist or escape, but he had listened. The swamp rewarded that. As mist drifted low over the water, he looked toward the horizon where faint, bioluminescent tendrils waved beneath the surface like underwater vines. They pulsed with a steady rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. For the first time, he spoke aloud into the darkness. "I understand now," he whispered. His voice sounded foreign in the thick air. The swamp responded with a distant hum, a low vibration that rippled through the roots beneath him. He felt it in his bones. When he closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling him toward sleep, he knew he had crossed a line no one else had. He was not merely surviving on Gora 9 anymore. He was learning to live as part of it. And as he drifted into restless dreams filled with green light and pulsing veins, the swamp sang quietly around him, welcoming him as one of its own. Eli woke to a deep, rhythmic sound that made the roots beneath him vibrate. It was not thunder, it was alive. The swamp was shifting again, reorganizing itself in the slow, deliberate way only vast living systems could. The air was heavy with moisture, carrying a scent of rot and sweetness so thick it felt almost drinkable. His fire had died sometime during the night, but faint light pulsed beneath the water nearby, as if veins of bioluminescent blood ran through the planet itself. He stood slowly, his muscles aching from days of tension, and listened. The sound grew louder, like something massive moving through the mire, each step sinking deep before rising again. He crouched low near the edge of his island, peering through the mist. At first he thought the fog was tricking him. Then a shape materialized, a creature so large that even the trees bent under its presence. Its back was covered in thick, moss-like growth, and from its sides hung tendrils that dripped glowing fluid into the swamp. Two eyes the size of lanterns flickered faintly in the gloom. It was the same kind of beast he had seen before, but this one was older, scarred, and surrounded by a faint haze that made the air shimmer. It moved slowly, not hunting, but searching. When it stopped near his camp, the air grew still. Eli held his breath and waited. The creature lowered its head, nostrils flaring as it inhaled the scent of smoke, sap, and resin that marked his presence. Instead of attacking, it released a long, vibrating sound that felt more like a question than a threat. The frequency resonated in his chest, vibrating his bones. He responded instinctively, making the same low hum he had used before. The creature turned slightly, one golden eye fixing on him. For a long moment, the two stood in perfect stillness, human and beast, bound by the quiet understanding that neither belonged to the world that had created them. Then the creature moved again, dipping its head closer to the ground. He realized it was not hostile. It was wounded. A deep gash ran along its flank, oozing thick greenish blood that hissed when it hit the water. The wound was infected with the same fungal patterns he had seen in decaying trees. The swamp consumed everything, even its own creatures, when weakness appeared. Without thinking, Eli stepped forward. His rational mind screamed to stay back, but something deeper guided him. He gathered a handful of the silver-tinted mixture he had refined the previous night and approached slowly, his voice low and calm. The beast rumbled softly, but did not move away. He knelt beside the wound, his hand trembling slightly as he spread the mixture along the edges. The reaction was immediate. The hissing stopped and the bleeding slowed. The creature shuddered, a wave of sound passing through the water. For a moment, Eli thought it might strike him down, but instead, the massive head lowered, pressing lightly against the ground as if in surrender. He took that as permission. Working carefully, he continued applying the salve, watching as the infected tissue began to crystallize into hardened, iridescent scales. When he finished, the creature emitted a low, resonant hum that filled the swamp. The smaller creatures nearby fell silent. The swamp itself seemed to listen. After several minutes, the beast straightened and began to move again. It stopped once more and turned its massive head toward him. Its golden eyes locked on his, glowing brighter for a moment before it vanished into the mist. Eli stood frozen, his heart pounding. Something had shifted. The swamp had seen what he had done, and it would remember. For the rest of that day, he noticed changes in the environment around his camp. The insects that used to swarm near his fire stayed away entirely. The bubbling pools no longer released their poisonous vapors as violently. Even the fog had thinned, allowing more light to reach the surface. It was as though the swamp had accepted his presence. But with that acceptance came something new: responsibility. He knew instinctively that by healing one of its oldest inhabitants, he had become part of the balance that ruled this place. Over the next few days, smaller creatures began appearing near his camp. Amphibious beasts with translucent skin crawled from the water, sniffing curiously before retreating. Some lingered longer, watching him from the shadows. He realized that they were drawn to the scent of his mixtures, the same salves he had used to heal the large creature. When he placed small portions of it on rocks and roots, the beasts consumed them, their colors brightening afterward. It was then he understood the full power of what he had created. His antidote was not only a cure for himself, it was nourishment for the swamp. He began experimenting on a larger scale. He collected spores from dead trees and burned them over controlled fire, capturing the fumes with woven leaves. When he mixed those gases with the clear sap he had found earlier, the resulting vapor formed a mist that lingered low to the ground. The effect was remarkable. The poisonous air became breathable. The nearby plants straightened as if revived, and even the water's surface cleared. He felt like he was not just surviving anymore, but influencing the environment itself. It was not dominance, but collaboration. As he continued his work, the creature's behavior changed. They no longer avoided him. Some began following him when he ventured beyond his island, moving in silent procession through the murky water. The larger ones cleared paths, their heavy bodies pushing aside vines and debris. Others guarded him from predators he glimpsed only briefly, shadows with too many eyes and teeth that glimmered in the dark. He realized the beasts were responding to him not as an intruder, but as something between ally and kin. At night, he heard their songs, low-frequency hums that traveled through the ground rather than the air. He started to understand the rhythm of those sounds, their meanings shaped by tone and pulse. When danger approached, the song grew sharp. When peace returned, it softened into long, resonant notes. He responded with his own crude imitations, using breath and the vibration of his throat. Over time, the responses became mutual, almost conversational. The swamp's communication was not based on words, but resonance, a living frequency that connected every creature to its environment. Eli learned to listen until he could feel those vibrations, even when no sound existed. One evening, as the fog rolled low over the water, the large beast returned. It emerged quietly, stopping at the edge of the light. Its wound had healed completely, replaced by a patch of shimmering green scales. It lowered its head again and released a deep rumble that Eli recognized as greeting. He stepped forward without hesitation, resting his hand on its massive hide. The creature's skin was warm, alive with faint pulses that matched the heartbeat of the swamp. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a bond of survival and trust. From then on, the creature often remained nearby, circling the perimeter of his camp like a silent guardian. Its presence changed everything. The smaller predators disappeared, and the environment around his island grew increasingly stable. Plants bloomed with thicker leaves, the air carried less poison, and clean water began to collect in shallow pools. It was as though the swamp's chaotic life force had begun to align itself around him and the creature he had healed. He could sense it, balance returning, but in a new form, one that revolved around his existence. As days passed, he found himself thinking less like a man and more like the swamp itself. His instincts sharpened, his thoughts slowed to match the rhythm of growth and decay that surrounded him. He stopped using artificial light altogether, relying on the faint glow of bioluminescent plants and beasts. He learned which plants sang when touched, which vines responded to sound, and how to coax the swamp's flora into forming structures. He began shaping his camp into something more organic, a place built from living roots and woven leaves, breathing and growing with him. One night, while sitting near his living shelter, Eli realized that he no longer feared the swamp. He had crossed from survival into coexistence. The beasts he had tamed were not pets or tools. They were partners in a vast, wordless understanding. He knew that beyond the fog, more dangers waited, but for now, he belonged here, more than he had ever belonged anywhere. As he drifted to sleep, the giant beast rested nearby, its breath steady and deep. Fireflies circled above the water, and the air vibrated with faint, harmonious hums. Eli felt the swamp's pulse through the ground, slow and steady like a heartbeat. He closed his eyes, whispering a quiet promise to the world that had tried to kill him, but instead had remade him. He would protect it now, just as it had begun to protect him. And as the night deepened, Gora 9 no longer felt like a hostile planet. It felt like a living organism that had finally accepted its newest creature. Eli woke to the sound of rain. Not the acidic drizzle that had once burned through armor, but real rain, cool, clean, and heavy. It drummed softly on the living canopy above his shelter, sliding down the woven leaves that now formed a natural roof. He stepped outside and lifted his face to the falling water. The sensation was strange, almost sacred. The swamp that had once tried to dissolve every living thing was changing, its hostility giving way to renewal. Around him, the air shimmered with fine mist, glowing faintly green, as if the planet itself was breathing again. The giant beast rested nearby, half submerged in a shallow pool, its golden eyes closed. The scene was peaceful, but Eli felt a growing tension beneath it, a silent warning that equilibrium never lasted long on Gora 9. For weeks he had lived in fragile harmony with the swamp. The antidote he brewed from the luminous fungi had spread through the ecosystem. He noticed that plants near his base grew stronger and resisted decay, their leaves losing the sickly film that once coated them. The water had become clearer, small fish-like organisms returning to its depths. But every balance demanded its opposite. The swamp began to resist the change in subtler ways. New spores appeared, darker, heavier, and more aggressive. They clung to surfaces like black ash, spreading faster than before. The beasts, once calm, had grown restless, their calls sharp and uneasy at night. Something deep within the ecosystem was reacting to his interference, and Eli knew it was time to face it. He began gathering samples of the new spores. They released a bitter smell, like scorched metal, and burned through cloth within minutes. He used pieces of animal hide to handle them, storing each cluster in resin-sealed shells. Back in his shelter, he examined them under the dim green light of bioluminescent moss. The spores pulsed faintly, releasing rhythmic waves of gas that almost seemed to respond to his breathing. They were alive in a way that went beyond biology. He realized with unease that the swamp's intelligence, its collective consciousness, was fighting back. By altering its balance, he had awakened a counterforce designed to restore its original nature. Determined to understand, he spent days experimenting. He mixed the spores with his antidote and watched the violent reaction that followed. Bursts of dark smoke, crackling flashes of light, and then silence. The spores died quickly, but their decay released something into the air that made his head spin. He stumbled outside, his vision blurring, the ground twisting beneath his feet. The swamp seemed to close in around him. He collapsed near the edge of the water, gasping as he felt the poison invade his mind, not his body, but his consciousness. He saw flashes of images, trees bending like veins, rivers pulsing like arteries, and an immense shape beneath the surface that looked like the heart of the planet itself. It was alive, ancient, and aware of him. He had not tamed it. He had disturbed it. When he woke, night had fallen. The air was dense, electric. The beast that guarded him stood motionless nearby, its body tense, eyes glowing fiercely. The swamp was silent except for the faint hum that grew louder every second. The water around the island rippled outward, glowing red instead of green. Something was approaching, something old. He rose slowly, gripping his knife, though he knew it was useless. The mist ahead split open as a new creature emerged, unlike any he had seen. It was smaller than the great beast he had healed, but far more menacing, its body made of fused bones and moss, its skin black and glistening. It moved with deliberate purpose, eyes burning with a dull crimson light. The beast growled low, stepping forward to block its path, but the intruder did not stop. Instead, it released a shriek so powerful that the water around it boiled. Eli covered his ears, but the sound vibrated through his entire body. The larger beast lunged, the ground shaking beneath its weight. The two collided with a thunderous impact that sent waves crashing against the island. Eli stumbled back as the fight unfolded in violent bursts of movement, claws tearing through flesh, glowing blood spraying across the trees. The swamp echoed with their roars, as if the planet itself was raging. He realized the black creature was not a random predator. It was the swamp's immune response, sent to destroy the source of contamination. Him. The balance he had created was an infection from the swamp's perspective, and the beasts were its antibodies. The realization filled him with both awe and dread. He had not saved this world. He had rewritten it, and now it was correcting him. The battle raged for what felt like hours. The healed beast, loyal and powerful, struck with precision, but the black one adapted, learning with every movement. Each time the larger beast tore through its flesh, the wounds sealed instantly, absorbing fragments of the antidote's energy. Eli watched helplessly, understanding that the creature was evolving with every blow. If he didn't act, both would die, and the swamp would erase everything he had built. He ran to his shelter and grabbed what remained of his antidote, thick silver liquid stored in a bone flask. He mixed it hastily with the transparent sap from the curative tree, creating a volatile combination that smoked as it touched the air. Without hesitation, he sprinted back to the battle and hurled the mixture into the black creature's open wound. The reaction was immediate and violent. A bright flash tore through the darkness, and the creature screamed, a sound that shook the air and made the swamp itself recoil. The ground pulsed beneath him, the water turned white, and for a moment everything went silent. Then, as the light faded, the black creature collapsed, its body dissolving into the swamp with a hiss. Eli fell to his knees, gasping. The air smelled of ozone and burnt earth. The larger beast stood weakly beside him, its scales scarred but intact. It lowered its head, touching his shoulder gently before retreating into the mist. He watched it go, knowing that the swamp would never be the same again. The balance had shifted once more, but in a way that no longer belonged to the planet. It now included him. Over the following days, Eli saw signs of the transformation everywhere. The poisonous plants began growing beside the curative ones, their toxins and antidotes intertwined. The creatures no longer avoided fire. Instead, they circled it peacefully. Even the black spores he had feared began to fade into the soil, becoming part of the ecosystem instead of destroying it. His antidote had not cured the swamp. It had taught it to evolve. The poison and the cure had merged into one endless cycle. Yet Eli felt the cost. His body changed further, his veins glowing faintly under his skin, his heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of the swamp. He no longer needed the antidote to survive. The swamp itself sustained him. He could drink its water, breathe its air, and move through its mists as if he were part of it. But the price was isolation. He was no longer entirely human. His reflection in the water showed eyes that glowed like the creatures he had tamed, and his skin shimmered faintly with the same iridescence as their scales. He had crossed the threshold between visitor and inhabitant, between man and myth. One night, as he sat near his fire, now burning blue instead of orange, he felt the swamp's consciousness reach out again. It was not hostile this time. It was curious. Through dreams and sensations, he understood its message. It accepted him, but it would not allow others of his kind to return. The harmony that existed now was fragile and could not withstand the corruption of ambition or technology. He was the exception because he had adapted through understanding, not domination. He was no longer an intruder. He was the bridge between two worlds that would never meet again. He looked out over the glowing waters and thought of the cadets who had perished, of the academy that would never know what truly happened here. He imagined the rescue ships returning one day, scanning the surface and finding only the endless green mist. They would call the mission lost, mark the planet as uninhabitable, and move on. And yet, beneath that toxic haze, life would continue, balanced, alive, and guided by the rhythm he had helped restore. As dawn broke, the mist parted just enough for him to see the distant shapes of creatures moving in the water, their bodies glowing in gentle harmony. He felt no fear, no sadness, only peace. The swamp had changed, and so had he. The poison that once killed everything it touched had found its cure, not in science, but in understanding. And in that understanding, Eli realized that survival was never about defeating nature. It was about becoming part of its endless design. The seasons on Gora 9 no longer followed the logic of orbit or axis. Time moved according to the pulse of the swamp itself. Rain fell when the land exhaled, the air grew still when it slept, and the water glowed brightest when it dreamed. Eli had long stopped tracking days. His body obeyed the planet's rhythm now, his mind synchronized to the slow, deliberate intelligence that surrounded him. The transformation was complete, yet his awareness remained sharp. He was still human in thought, but not in form. His skin reflected faint hues of green and gold beneath the damp light, and his veins carried the faint bioluminescence of the very antidote that had once saved him. He was neither conqueror nor guest anymore. He was the keeper of a balance older than the academy that had sent him here. One morning, the mist parted in a way it never had before, revealing the outlines of a sky clearer than he remembered. For a moment, he saw the pale shape of Gora 9's second moon drifting above the horizon. It filled him with a strange sense of finality. The swamp hummed faintly beneath his feet, as though acknowledging his thought. He sensed movement in the distance, patterns too precise to belong to native life. He climbed a ridge of twisted roots and saw a flicker of metallic light slicing through the mist. It was a ship. The rescue mission had finally come. For a long while he stood motionless, torn between instinct and memory. The sight of human machinery triggered a cascade of emotions buried deep within him. The sleek hull, the blinking navigation lights, the steady rhythm of mechanical life, all of it belonged to a world he had once lived in. A world of logic, ambition, and noise. The ship descended slowly, engines humming low to avoid disturbing the terrain. When it touched down on a patch of stable ground miles away, the swamp responded immediately. Vines tightened, spores released in defense, and the beasts stirred uneasily. Eli felt the disturbance ripple through the network of life beneath him. The swamp remembered what metal and fire had done to it long ago. It would not welcome this intrusion. He moved quickly through the marsh, accompanied by two of the smaller beasts that had learned to follow his gestures. Their scales shimmered in rhythm with his breathing, like living extensions of his will. As he approached the clearing, he saw figures in environmental suits stepping out of the ship. Humans, 6 of them, each armed, scanning the air with sensors that blinked red. He recognized the insignia of the Galactic Academy. They were not explorers this time. They were assessors. They had come to confirm the planet's hostility, retrieve data, and officially close its file. Eli stopped at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the mist. His reflection in the water startled him. He no longer looked human enough to approach without fear. The creatures beside him growled softly, sensing his hesitation. He reached out and touched one of them, feeling its heartbeat sync with his own. Then he stepped forward, emerging into the open. The nearest human froze, lifting his weapon instinctively. The others turned, their helmets reflecting the faint green glow from Eli's skin. One of them spoke through the comm, a woman's voice distorted by static. "Identify yourself." Her tone was steady, but Eli could hear confusion beneath it. He raised his hand slowly, palms open, a gesture of peace that no longer felt entirely his. "Eli Morgan," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Human, cadet of the Academy, survivor of the Gora 9 expedition." The silence that followed was suffocating. The woman stepped forward cautiously. "Impossible. The report listed no survivors." He smiled faintly. "Reports lie." She hesitated, lowering her weapon slightly. The others exchanged uncertain glances. One of them moved closer and scanned him with a wrist device. The display flickered wildly, unable to categorize what it detected. "His biosigns are human," the man muttered. "But the readings, they're off the scale." Before they could react further, the ground trembled. The swamp had awakened fully now, recognizing the presence of metal and fear. Dark waves rippled outward, and from the mist rose dozens of glowing eyes. The beasts, his companions, surrounded the clearing, their bodies low and tense. The humans panicked, raising their weapons again. Eli stepped between the two sides, shouting above the growing hum. "Do not fire. The swamp is alive. It understands intentions. Stand down." The woman hesitated again, but one of the soldiers fired a warning shot. The pulse beam hit a nearby root, igniting it. The air exploded with energy, and the beasts roared. The swamp responded instantly. Vines erupted from the ground, wrapping around the metal hull of the ship. The creatures lunged forward, not in rage but in defense, protecting the ecosystem that had accepted Eli as one of its own. He felt the network's will coursing through him. Fear, anger, instinct, but he refused to let it end in blood. He ran forward, placing himself between the creatures and the humans. "Stop," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "This world is not what you think. It is not poison anymore." He turned to the commander, his eyes glowing faintly with the swamp's light. "It cured itself. It learned. It lives in balance now. Leave it be." The commander stared at him through her visor, uncertain whether she was speaking to a man or a ghost. The beasts stopped, their breaths heavy, waiting for his signal. The swamp's pulse slowed beneath his feet, hesitating in response to his calm. For the first time, both sides listened. After a long silence, the commander lowered her weapon. "You're telling me this planet's alive?" He nodded. "Alive and aware. You can't contain it, and you don't need to. It does not want war, only peace." She looked at the ship, the tangled vines around it, and then back at him. "And you? What are you now?" He took a slow breath, the faint luminescence of his veins flickering under his skin. "Something in between. The swamp needed a bridge to understand humanity. I became that bridge." She said nothing for a while, only watching him as the vines loosened their grip on the ship. Finally, she spoke quietly. "We'll mark the planet as prohibited. No one will return." He inclined his head. "That's enough." She nodded once, signaling her crew to withdraw. The engines ignited again, sending waves across the water. Eli stepped back into the mist, watching the ship rise until it vanished into the clouds. When silence returned, the beasts relaxed, dispersing slowly into the trees. The swamp's hum shifted into a gentle rhythm, no longer tense but satisfied. Eli stood alone on the edge of the clearing, the reflection of the departing light fading from the water's surface. He felt the air fill with calm energy, the kind that followed great storms. The planet had survived intrusion once again, not through violence, but through understanding. As night settled, he walked back to his island. The paths he had built from living roots glowed softly under his steps. The giant beast awaited him, lowering its head in recognition. He placed a hand on its scarred flank, feeling the warmth of its pulse. Around them, the swamp sang in low, harmonic tones, its countless voices unified in quiet equilibrium. He understood now that the balance was eternal, that life and poison were not opposites, but reflections of the same will, the will to endure. He built no more fires that night. Instead, he sat in the soft glow of the living plants, watching the mist rise and swirl around him. The air was thick, but breathable, the water clear enough to see shapes moving below the surface. The swamp no longer felt like a place of death. It felt like a memory that had healed. When dawn came, the first rays of pale light cut through the mist, revealing a landscape reborn. The trees stretched taller, their roots entwined with flowering vines. The beasts grazed peacefully, their scales reflecting the soft morning glow. Eli watched in silence, feeling no longing for the stars above. He had found something no academy or civilization could give him, a purpose woven into the pulse of a living world. He whispered softly into the wind, his words carried by the breath of the swamp. "I am home." The response came not in sound but in vibration, the slow, resonant heartbeat of Gora 9 echoing through the roots, the water, and his own chest. It was no longer the swamp of death. It was life in its purest, most unforgiving form, and it had chosen him to keep its balance. Years later, when the next rescue probe passed overhead, it detected signs of activity, ordered patterns in the vegetation, rhythmic energy pulses, and a faint human signal repeating endlessly through the mist. It was not a call for help, but a message of completion. The swamp had a guardian now, and the poison had become its cure. Gora 9 lived, and so did the man who had learned to belong to it.